Hi, it's Katrina. For centuries, countless ships have vanished under mysterious circumstances. The Bermuda Triangle is only the beginning. It's not the only place where weird things happen. Today, we are diving into some mysterious disappearance zones where strange occurrences have captivated our imaginations and baffled scientists. From ancient shipwrecks to vanishing aircraft, these locations offer a glimpse into the unknown. So let's go on an adventure. The new Bermuda Triangle. There have been whispers of a new Bermuda Triangle emerging in the Black Sea. There have been countless shipwrecks and unusual incidents in the Black Sea throughout history. This body of water is home to complex currents and weather patterns which can change on a dime. The Black Sea has its own share of myths and legends, some of which may be related to unexplained disappearances or maritime tragedies. One of the biggest secrets the Black Sea holds is possible proof of the biblical flood. Was the flood based on a real event? Evidence is building that the story of Noah's Ark was real, and that the massive flood that covered the world even created the Black Sea. The shipwrecks found in the Black Sea provide valuable evidence that can help scientists find the answer. Thousands of feet beneath the surface of the Black Sea, not far from the old town of Nesebar on the coast of Bulgaria, marine archaeologists did a survey of the seabed. Professor John Adams from the University of Southampton was the lead scientist on the project. John's team spent a month on board the ship Strill Explorer, looking at the bottom of the Black Sea at a depth of between 1,000 and 6,000 feet. They deployed sonar technology and used remotely operated submarine vehicles. With their staggering amount of tech, they reconstructed 60 sunken wrecks in 3D. Imagine how much history was aboard 60 sunken vessels. The wrecks are spread across an area of more than 700 square miles. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the project was huge. John and the other researchers went above and beyond to put together an image of the sea floor and its myriad of wrecked ships. The area they surveyed is known as the Dead Zone. It's this spot that makes people believe the Black Sea is the other Bermuda Triangle. They don't call it the Dead Zone for nothing. This area has been sinking ships since at least 400 BC. That's how old the oldest shipwrecks are that scientists have found so far. At depths of 6,000 feet, there is such little oxygen that the wood hardly decays. That's why many of the oldest boats are in the best shape. You can even see the individual chisel marks left behind by the boat builders on some chunks of timber. But what does this all have to do with the biblical flood sent by God to wipe out human society? In the year 2000, an interesting new idea started to move through the scientific community. Marine geologist William Ryan and his colleague Walter Pittman came up with an exciting theory. They suggested that the biblical flood was based on a real event that occurred 20,000 years ago. That event was the Ice Age flooding of the Black Sea. 20,000 years ago, the Black Sea wasn't a sea at all, but a lake. As the Ice Age began to end, melting ice flowed into the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean Sea was filled with water, like when you forget to turn off the faucet and the bathtub overflows. All of that overflowing water created a deluge of biblical proportions. William and Walter said the floodwaters were 200 times stronger than Niagara Falls. Where do you think all of that water went? It flowed into the Black Sea, bulging it from a small lake to the size of Ireland in just a few months. All prehistoric societies living in the area were totally obliterated by the floodwaters. The theory has plenty of skeptics, but the proof is more than convincing. Let me show you why. 12 miles from the coast of the Black Sea in Turkey, scientists found the remnants of ancient buildings all along the pre-flooded shoreline. The Black Sea might have also been home to an underwater city from a forgotten civilization. These were cities that people lived in, but were destroyed by an enormous flood. The shipwrecks mapped by John Adams and his team could help to prove or disprove that the Black Sea was created by an enormous flood. They should be able to study soil samples retrieved from the Nesebar shipwrecks. The samples will show whether the Black Sea rose rapidly in a few months or if it happened gradually over thousands of years. Proving Noah's Ark to be a historical fact might come down to a handful of underwater dirt in the Black Sea's own Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea and vile Vortices. Have you ever heard of a place so terrifying that even the Mongols were afraid? Remember, the Mongols were known for their brutality and ruthlessness. Also known as the Dragon's Triangle, the Devil's Sea is a place feared by all manner of seamen. It's located near the coast of Japan in the Pacific Ocean and is one of the 12 vile vortices of our world. If you haven't heard of the 12 vile vortices, you're in for a shock. Vile vortices are places on the surface of the planet that have a very intense electromagnetic field. 10 of them are spread across the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, while the other 2 are the North Pole and the South Pole. Together, they form a geometric figure called an icosahedron. It's a polyhedron made of 20 faces. But why give them such an angry name? They are called vile because each vortex is known for messing with aircrafts and ships. One of them can be found in the Bermuda Triangle, which I'm sure doesn't surprise you in the slightest. Another vortex is the South Atlantic Anomaly, not far from the coast of Brazil. When I tell you where some of the other vile vortices are, I have a feeling you're going to be surprised. One is in the Indus Valley city of Mohenjo-Daro, built around the dawn of civilization. Another is at Hamakulia in Hawaii. One is at a megalithic ruin in Algeria, and another is at a megalithic ruin in Zimbabwe. There is even a vile vortex at Easter Island. These points of intense electromagnetic energy are either connected to ancient ruins or at a place where seemingly paranormal things occur. That can't be a coincidence. The Devil's Sea is one of the worst of the vile vortices. It's a place where stories of vanishing ships and ghost vessels have been told for centuries, perhaps even millennia. One of the most notable stories tied to the Devil's Sea takes us back to the days of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century AD. You might be surprised to learn that the Mongolian hordes almost conquered Japan. Japan might be part of Mongolia today if the Mongols hadn't been beaten back by a series of freak storms in the Devil's Sea. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and 5th supreme ruler of the Mongols, led his armies to the coast of China in 1274. He had his sights set on Japan. He loaded his ships and set out, but they were struck down by the gods. Actually, it was a kamikaze typhoon that came out of nowhere, crushing his vessels and killing 40,000 soldiers. Undeterred, Kublai Khan tried it again in 1281. The same thing happened. It was as if the typhoons were summoned to protect Japan from invasion. Even today, many Japanese believe their country was spared by the gods. Others blame the typhoons on whatever paranormal phenomenon fuels the Dragon's Triangle. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter what caused the typhoons. The second one was enough to change Kublai Khan's mind. He gave up on his plans to invade Japan. In the early part of the 19th century, sailors began talking about a mysterious vessel they had been seeing in the Devil's Sea. The vessel looked like a traditional Japanese incense burner. It was unlike any ship the sailors had seen before. Even more mysterious was that the ship was captained by a strange woman who stood like an apparition on the deck. She was a ghost. When the ships tried to get closer to the vessel, it always disappeared. Things began to take a modern twist in the 1940s. Fishing vessels began to vanish. Then, during World War II and in the years after, many military vessels disappeared between the islands of Miyake and Iwo Jima. The Japanese were so concerned about their disappearing vessels that they sent the research ship Kaiomaru No. 5 to investigate in 1952. But guess what happened to it? The research vessel disappeared as well. It's like the rescue team needing to be rescued. Although its wreckage was later discovered, no one knows what became of the 31 crew members. They seem to have been swallowed by the Devil's Sea. The Japanese government declared the area too dangerous for marine voyages and transporting goods. I can't think of another time that a government labeled a part of the sea too dangerous to use for reasons of paranormal activity. The area's other nickname, Dragon's Triangle, comes from an ancient Chinese fable. Legend has it dragons used to live in the waters here. They were huge and would attack passing ships when they got hungry. These tales have been told since at least 1000 BC. Maybe there really are sea monsters lurking off the coast of Japan. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to RJ Ham for the super thanks. It really means a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The Asian Bermuda Triangle. Look out, Black Sea Bermuda Triangle. There is an even newer Bermuda Triangle in town, and it is in Asia. After the crash of Taiwan's Trans-Asia plane in Taipei on February 4, 2015, many people were convinced that the Bermuda Triangle had shifted east. It might not be that there is a new Bermuda Triangle. It might just be that the Bermuda Triangle has moved. There have been a lot of crashes and disappearances in the new triangle, enough to warrant some serious concern. This new triangle stretches from the northern edge of the Philippines to Taiwan, up and to the left until hitting the coast of China, and then back down to Southeast Asia. It incorporates parts of the South China Sea and the Java Sea. One of the most famous disappearances was Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 in 2014. It disappeared while traveling from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia to Beijing in China. The plane and all 239 passengers vanished into thin air. Despite 10 years of searching, not a single piece of evidence has ever been found that the plane crashed. It's more like it blinked into an alternate dimension. Shortly after the plane's disappearance, there was a Malaysian politician claiming that something strange was happening in the waters off the coast of Vietnam. Mapping instruments were supposedly rendered ineffective in the region. Something similar has been said about the original Bermuda Triangle. Then in December of that same year, 2014, AirAsia flight QZ8501 crashed shortly after its takeoff from the city of Surabaya in Indonesia. Sadly, all 162 people on board were killed. So what is the truth about this triangle? Well, how much do you know about the original Bermuda Triangle? Did you know that over the last century, more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes have disappeared above its waters? There are a lot of exciting theories surrounding the truth behind the Bermuda Triangle. People have blamed the disappearances on everything from magnetic fields to extraterrestrial abductions, and even time warps and portals to alternate realities. Scientists say there isn't anything paranormal about the Bermuda Triangle or any other ocean triangle. They have blamed the curious disappearances on things like changes in weather caused by the Gulf Stream. Other experts say that statistically speaking, the Bermuda Triangle has a higher number of disappearances compared to other places in the ocean. There is so much traffic that accidents are bound to happen. What do you think? Is there reason to worry if your next flight takes you over the new Bermuda Triangle of Asia? Are you concerned? The Great Lakes Triangle. Have you ever heard of a place where pilots fear to fly even more than the infamous Bermuda Triangle? Most pilots try to avoid flying above the Great Lakes so that they don't vanish into thin air or crash and sink. Even when it would be faster to fly over the water, they take the long way around. And you're going to be shocked to learn why. The Federal Aviation Administration instituted a special lake reporting service for pilots brave enough to maneuver above the water. The rule says that pilots must make continuous reports to ground stations when above the Great Lakes. If there is a delay of 10 minutes, a search and rescue operation is immediately launched. It's pretty crazy that the Federal Aviation Administration takes flying above the Great Lakes so seriously. They take it more seriously than flying above the Bermuda Triangle. Pilots even have a nickname for the area. They call it the Great Lakes Triangle. In 1977, aviator Jay Gurley wrote that the Great Lakes account for more unexplained disappearances per unit than the Bermuda Triangle. That's an astounding comparison, seeing as the Bermuda Triangle is 16 times bigger than the area of the Great Lakes. What's even more surprising is when you realize that most of the disappearances are occurring inside an even smaller triangle within the Great Lakes Triangle. Just how many mysterious triangles are there? Most incidents are in Lake Michigan. The Lake Michigan Triangle starts near Sheboygan, moves across the water to above Grand Rapids, and meets at an oblong point above South Bend. The first big mystery of the Michigan Triangle was in the 17th century. A French ship called the Griffin was lost, along with everybody on board. It was 1679 and the ship had just docked at Green Bay. They loaded 12,000 pounds of fur and set sail for Lake Erie, but they never arrived. There is no evidence to show what happened to the Griffin. It's gone unsolved for nearly 400 years. Another notable disappearance was the sinking of the Rosabelle. The double-masted schooner was discovered capsized twice, each time with the crew gone. This is the kind of coincidence that can send chills up your spine. The first incident was in 1875. A car ferry moving across Lake Michigan came upon the Rosabelle floating upside down. The 10 men that had left on board the ship were gone. There wasn't any trace of the crew at all. After a thorough look, the Rosabelle was flipped over and returned to Milwaukee, where she remained in service. Fast forward to 1921, the same thing happened again. The ship was about to take off with a load of potatoes and lumber when the captain had a final destination moment. His name was Ed Johnson, and he would not get on the ship. Ed was a seasoned captain who had no fear of the sea, but he would not get on the schooner. It later came out that Ed had a premonition of disaster. It was so convincing that he risked his reputation on it. Ed saw death and doom awaiting the crew, so he stayed on dry land. After a lot of drama from the crew, they left without their captain. I can't stress enough how weird this would have been. It was as if Blackbeard was suddenly too afraid to put on his pirate hat and go hunting for booty because he had a bad dream. Ed Johnson's crew must have thought he was nuts, but he wasn't. Ed had somehow seen the future. Several days later, the Rosabelle was found capsized and the crew was gone. They vanished into thin air and the ship was wrecked, just as Ed had seen in his vision. The mystery of the Rosabelle was never solved. The schooner was dragged into Racine Harbor by the United States Coast Guard, and that was the end of its long run. Nobody was about to get on that ship ever again. Who blew up the Sultana? On a moonlit night in 1865, a steamship carrying thousands of weary soldiers, prisoners, and civilians exploded on the Mississippi River, sending shockwaves through the nation. The cause of the Sultana disaster remains a haunting mystery, a riddle that has baffled investigators for nearly 2 centuries. In April of 1865, the U.S. Civil War was coming to an end. The Sultana, massive at 260 feet long and 42 feet wide, was put into service as a transport ship. She set sail on April 27th with 180 private passengers and 2,000 prisoners, guards, and Confederate soldiers. In total, there were around 2,400 people on the boat, 6 times more than the Sultana was supposed to be carrying. She sailed from Vicksburg in Mississippi and headed up the river. To be on board this vessel would have been a nightmare, way worse than flying on your most dreaded airline. Many of the prisoners were sick and dying. Even though a lot of the prisoners had just been released, the conditions on the boat were still pretty bad. Most people had to stand, unable to even sit or squat because there was such little room. The ship was on her way to Memphis. It was having a difficult time getting there because a large amount of snow was melting, adding to the strength of the Mississippi's current. The ship did reach Memphis in the end, and some people got off, and most people stayed on. After a bit of a break, the Sultana headed upriver again. Just shy of 2 o'clock in the morning, she exploded. The explosion was huge. Many passengers were disintegrated by the explosion instantaneously. Many drowned as they were blown out of the ship and into the cold Mississippi water in the black of night. Almost 1,100 people perished, and many who lived did so with lifelong injuries. What people have been trying to figure out ever since that fateful night is why the ship exploded. Some have blamed it on the ironwork. They say the quality was so poor that the boilers catastrophically failed, blowing the whole ship to pieces. Others think the steamship's cooling system was clogged with mud and debris from the river water. Without enough water cooling the boilers, they may have overheated and exploded. There is also the chance that the ship was sabotaged, seeing as this was the end of the Civil War. Would you ever get on an old-timey steamship, or would you be afraid it might blow up? The Lost Fleet of Jingha. While Europeans were still navigating by the stars and battling for dominance in small regions, a Chinese admiral named Jingha commanded a fleet that dwarfed anything the West had ever seen. His voyages were a testament to China's power and ambition, a century before Columbus set sail. In 1371, Jingha was born in the small Chinese town of Yunnan. He would grow into a great diplomat and tactician, and ultimately build himself a fleet of ships with which to conquer the world. His early life was awash in blood and chaos. The The Ming dynasty was just starting to take over territory throughout China. As a young boy, his home province was attacked. His father was killed fighting for their home, and when Jingha tried to escape, he was captured. Jingha wound up as a prisoner in service of the Prince of Yan, who would years later take on the title of Yongle Emperor. What began as an unfortunate kidnapping ended as a stroke of luck. Zheng gained the trust of the young prince and slowly moved through the ranks to become a junior officer in the army. He may have been a captive, but he was captured at such a young age that it was easier to mold Zheng into a loyal subject. When the prince became the emperor, Zheng was given control over the royal fleet. In 1405, Zheng set out on an expedition with 62 ships and 27,800 men. Over the next decade or so, Zheng traveled to various countries and forged diplomatic relationships with the civilizations there. Zheng, renowned for his maritime exploits, was equally celebrated for his eclectic religious views. As documented in the Chang'e and Liu Jiagang inscriptions, he was a fervent devotee of Tian Fei, the protective goddess of sailors. His faith in Tian Fei was often credited with the success of his voyages. What's crazy is that in less than 100 years, Christopher Columbus would cross the Atlantic with only 3 boats. Columbus's boats look like life rafts compared to the glorious ships of Zhenghe's fleet. But the Chinese fleet never found the New World. Nobody truly knows what happened. After Zheng's 7th voyage, the fleet was supposedly disbanded because it was too expensive. Just imagine if it wasn't. Imagine if it was China's massive fleet that landed in North America before Europeans. How different do you think the world would be today? The deepest shipwreck in the Mediterranean. A ghost ship from the Bronze Age has made a chilling return, challenging our understanding of ancient maritime exploration. It was found in the deep sea of the eastern Mediterranean. In early summer of 2024, scientists announced the discovery of a cargo ship that sank under suspicious circumstances 3,400 years ago. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority's Marine Unit, the ship sank in a crisis. Nobody knows what that crisis was. It may have been a freak storm, a rogue wave, or even a pirate attack. These were all common occurrences in the late Bronze Age. The ship wasn't discovered by archaeologists, though. It was found at an exceptional depth of 1.1 miles below the surface by an oil company. A routine inspection by natural gas giant E&P revealed the sunken ship by their offshore operation near Israel. The ship and its cargo were scattered across the seabed. Marine archaeologists collected the artifacts and identified them as Canaanite storage jars. The ship had been filled to the brim with cargo, mostly huge jars known as amphorae. At the time it sank, it was 56 miles from the nearest shore. The discovery proves a few very important facts about ancient seafarers. First and foremost, that they were able to navigate without seeing the coast. Captains could pilot their vessels essentially blind, likely using only celestial bodies to guide their way, things like the sun and the stars. This seems simple, but the implications are huge. If sailors could be 56 miles from the coast and find their way in darkness, they could likely find their way in the open ocean. Finding a shipwreck this old and this far into the Mediterranean goes to show that people in the Bronze Age could have easily made long-distance voyages across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. They certainly knew how to build the ships for it. The marine archaeologists sent an underwater robot to map the shipwreck. It turned out to be 46 feet long, making it a monumental merchant ship. It wouldn't have been the only one out in those deep waters. There would have been hundreds of ships just like it moving back and forth along ancient trading routes. Perhaps they were trading routes that went as far as the Americas. Maybe they connected civilizations in Europe, Egypt, and Mesopotamia with Native Americans. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Aliens in the Great Lakes. Aliens have been to Lake Michigan, and they may have even abducted some people. This strange true story begins on the evening of June 23, 1950. Flight 2501 with Northwest Orient Airlines left LaGuardia Airport in New York City with 55 passengers on board and 3 crew members. The flight was bound for Minneapolis. You can probably guess already that they never arrived. The pre-flight weather review showed possible squalls along the route, but it wasn't enough to be concerned about. To avoid any major turbulence caused by the squalls, Captain Robert Lind descended to an altitude of 4,000 feet instead of where he was supposed to be at 6,000 feet. Shortly after descending, while flying directly over the Great Lakes Triangle, radio transmission ceased. Captain Lind steered south in an attempt to avoid incoming storm activity. At 11:13 p.m., he radioed air traffic control, asking them if he could descend even lower to 2,500 feet. And that was the end of communication. What happened next has spawned countless conspiracy theories, but nothing has ever been substantiated. Right around 11:13 p.m., some witnesses reported seeing a flash of light over the lake that was much brighter than simple lightning. It was more of a boom of light, like an explosion. Not to mention that some witnesses also heard an explosion. The explosion was multitudes louder than the thunder rumbling over the lake. By midnight, Flight 2501 was officially missing. The next day, the Coast Guard found an oil slick and what appeared to be debris near Benton Harbor. In the days that followed, search teams discovered bits and pieces of the flight and its passengers. I must warn you now that some of the pieces that were found were pretty disturbing. Search teams uncovered a pair of child's pants, later identified as belonging to Chester Schaefer, only 8 years old. They discovered random human ears, human bones, and severed human hands. The search and rescue operators found one seat armrest and a few slices of upholstery. Officials were so concerned about beachgoers stumbling upon body parts that they closed beaches on the lake. It sounds cut and dry, right? The plane clearly crashed and the debris that was being discovered was from the wreckage. Only it isn't cut and dry. The researchers never found any sizable amount of the plane, and they never found its engines. Most of the recovered debris was no bigger than a human hand. It's almost as if the airplane went through a paper shredder. The official assumption has always been that the plane crashed into Lake Michigan and disintegrated at high velocity. Yet officials have never been able to figure out what caused the plane to crash. And although some think the plane may have been struck by lightning, none of the tiny fragments were found with burn marks. Another theory is that everyone on board was sucked into some kind of alien wormhole, or aliens deliberately abducted the plane and the people on board and somehow cut off a lot of ears in the process. Not only did eyewitnesses report seeing a bright flash and hearing a loud boom, 2 police officers in the area also saw what appeared to be an unidentified flying object hovering above the lake for 2 full hours. This was immediately after the plane disappeared. That is a wild coincidence if I've ever heard one. What do you think happened to the passengers of Flight 2501? Let me know in the comments. The Stonehenge of the Sea. What does the discovery of this ancient structure reveal about the Earth's past climate and sea levels? 130 feet beneath the surface of the Mediterranean Sea, not far from the coast of Sicily, is evidence of a lost civilization. In 2015, scientists found a colossal monolith down at this depth. It's now been revealed that the monolith is at the center of a structure that looks shockingly like Stonehenge. History could be rewritten thanks to this discovery. The monolith was found in the Sicilian Channel, and like I said, it's huge. It would have originally stood 40 feet tall. Now it's toppled, lying sideways on the sea floor. The stone inside of it has been hollowed out and turned into a colorful home for sea creatures and marine life. The fish have had a long time to take over the monolith. It's at least 9,350 years old. You might also like to know that it weighs a staggering 15 tons. Scientists have a lot of questions to answer. Who built the monolith? How did they move such a heavy block of stone during the actual Stone Age? The monument could be twice as old as Stonehenge, making it a true enigma in human history. Remember when I told you earlier about how the Black Sea may have been created by a giant flood? The same hypothesis can be used to explain why there is a giant megalith at the bottom of the Sicilian Channel. Researchers think it originally stood on an island, which was submerged by a flood 9,300 years ago. This couldn't have been the same flood that created the Black Sea, But it is a similar situation. It makes you wonder how many floods there were in prehistory, and how many civilizations were wiped out by changing sea levels. As for what the mysterious monolith was used for, scientists haven't even begun to guess. Stonehenge is above ground, 4,300 years newer, and has been studied for centuries. But scientists still don't know what it was used for. Stonehenge could have been a meeting place for ancient people, or a religious temple, or it could have been used for worshipping ancestors or holding weird festivals. The list goes on and on. But the point is that if scientists don't know what Stonehenge was used for, they definitely don't know what the giant monolith in the Mediterranean was used for. Do you have any theories? The Bermuda Triangle of space. I've been telling you about strange ocean triangles today, but I can't resist mentioning a very different one. The Bermuda Triangle of space. It is notorious for disrupting spacecraft that pass through the region. While no crafts have vanished mysteriously, they have experienced significant interference. This is obviously a major concern for astronauts, as the last thing you want in a floating metal tube is malfunctioning equipment. The Bermuda Triangle of space, also called the South Atlantic Anomaly, is positioned just above the Atlantic Ocean, but its total is huge. It stretches from Chile to Zimbabwe across the entire ocean. The anomaly is at the exact place where the inner Van Allen radiation belt gets closest to the surface of the planet. It's a place where the magnetic field is super weak. You can think of it as the antithesis of a vile vortex. Instead of having such a strong electromagnetic field that it sinks ships, its magnetic field is so weak that it messes with spaceships. There are two Van Allen radiation belts. They are actual belts shaped like donuts that surround planet Earth. Invisible, the belts are held in place by our magnetic field. Each radiation belt is a ring of charged particles. The inner belt has high-energy protons. The outer belt mainly consists of electrons. These radiation belts are what prevent us from turning into mutated ghouls. They protect the whole planet from the harmful radiation of the sun. While the belts protect us, they also have some small drawbacks. Professor John Tarduno from the University of Rochester said the Bermuda Triangle of space is so dangerous that any spacecraft moving through the area could be severely damaged.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Murud Fort, located on a small island in the waters off western India's Maharashtra state, Murud is a historic sea fort that started out as a simple wooden fort built by some fishermen during the 15th century. During the 16th century, a group of people called the Cities, who are thought to descend from East African slaves, took over the site and built a stone citadel, which still stands to this day. For 500 years, the fort was unconquerable. In its heyday, it was one of the strongest marine forts in India, and the cities were able to fight the Mughals, Marathas, Portuguese, and the British. The sprawling 22-acre property consisted of 19 towers that were equipped with cannons, along with many smaller towers, or turrets, which were also mounted with weapons. Some of the weapons are still visible among the ruins, including 3 massive cannons. The fort had palaces, a mosque, and even freshwater lakes. Murud gained a reputation for being impenetrable, not only because it was impressively well built, but because the cities were exceptionally skilled at diplomacy when it came to interacting with other groups. The fort was occupied until around 4 decades ago, with as many as 550 families living on the grounds at one point. The last family that lived in the fort was an uncle and his niece, who left when he died. Researchers are hoping that the Great Fort with its rich history will be preserved because as time goes by, its story is getting lost. The world's oldest war memorial. During the 3rd millennium BC, 30 bodies were laid to rest in a massive burial mound near the Euphrates River, in what is now the Syrian town of Tal Banat. Known as the White Monument, researchers long believed that the human remains and grave goods belonged to enemy fighters of the people who buried them. But a closer look revealed that the individuals laid to rest were actually members of the local community and militia. Similar burials have been found throughout northern Syria, but the White Monument is distinct in several ways. Unlike the other mass graves, where the soldiers' bodies were thrown into a haphazard pile, the deceased were arranged in an organized fashion after being transported to the site from somewhere else. This was a sign of respect that was generally not afforded to enemy burials. The careful placement of the bodies indicates that the grave is a tribute to local fallen soldiers, making the 4,500-year-old site the world's oldest war memorial. It's unclear whether the individuals buried at the site were the losers or the winners in the battle that cost them their lives, but they were laid to rest with honor either way. These findings came to light when researchers re-examined the site, which was first excavated during the 1980s and 90s. The new information warrants a deeper investigation of other burial mounds throughout the region, in case previous studies missed important details that could change history. Neapolis. In 365 AD, a massive tsunami struck the North African coast in what is now Tunisia, wiping most of the Roman port city of Neapolis off the map. Modern historians know about the disaster based on the writings of a soldier and historian named Ammian Marcellin, who also noted that the tsunami wreaked havoc on the Greek island of Crete and the Egyptian city of Alexandria. This is one of very few mentionings of Neapolis in ancient texts. During the Third Punic War, which lasted from 149 to 146 BC, the city's people sided with Carthage rather than Rome. The Romans won the war and took control of the city. Its absence from historical records suggests that Neapolis was punished in some destructive way for supporting the enemy, leaving experts with little to learn from. Some of the settlement's ruins are buried beneath the modern-day city of Naboul, making them impossible to explore. In 2013, archaeologists found some submerged ruins of part of the city that had been sucked beneath the waves during the tsunami. The discovery came after a storm ravaged the seabed, revealing man-made stone structures, including street signs and monuments. Included among the ruins were more than 100 containers that were used for making a popular ancient fish-based fermented condiment called garum, indicating that Neapolis specialized in its production. This alone suggests that the city was one of the Roman Empire's richest and most important commercial centers, and yet so little is known about it since it was shunned from the history books. Sistine Chapel of the Ancients. Around 12,000 years ago, or perhaps even earlier, some of the first people to live in what is now southeastern Colombia covered about an 8-mile stretch of cliffs with tens of thousands of paintings over many generations. The images mostly depict Ice Age beasts, including mastodons, giant sloths, camelids, and horses. There are also humanoid figures, hunting scenes, geometric shapes, and animals such as deer, alligators, bats, monkeys, turtles, and porcupines. Nicknamed the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients, the red ochre paintings have survived into modern times and comprise the largest collection of rock art in the Americas. Indigenous locals have long known about the images and consider them part of their heritage. Regional experts began studying the site decades ago, but the outside world first learned about the artwork in 2020, when the press mistakenly described it as a new discovery. Some of the murals are located so high up, their painters had to use special ladders. They were created by hunter-gatherers who survived on fish, reptiles, mammals, and fruit. Researchers are using the findings in their ongoing quest to determine who the Amazon's first settlers were. Sadly, they neglected to consult locals for their knowledge and insight on the paintings, leading to tension between the two groups. The Lost City of Nia. Rabbana Merkuli is an ancient stronghold that sits in a valley surrounded by mountains in Iraqi Kurdistan. Its history dates back to the Parthian Empire, which ruled from 247 BC to 224 AD. Archaeologists recently discovered intricately carved rock reliefs at the settlement's 2 entrances, depicting a ruler of the Parthian kingdom of Adiabene. Describing the artwork as ancient propaganda, lead study researcher Michael Brown told Live Science that the rare, life-sized monuments were meant to make a political statement. Experts believe that the site represents the lost city of Nia, which was previously only known to exist based on some of its first-century coins that were discovered somewhere else. The reliefs on the entrances may depict the city's founder, Natunisar. Brown explained that Rabbana Merkuli is the region's largest and most impressive Parthian site, and the only one bearing royal iconography. making it the best candidate for being Nia. He said that the fortress likely played an important role in managing the Parthians' relations with other groups, including Rome, India, and China's Han Dynasty as a center of trade, diplomacy, and military force. There is little evidence of rebuilding at the fort, according to Brown, who estimates that it was used for no more than 100 years. The Parthians' reasons for abandoning it are a mystery. Shima. For a long time, a series of rock walls on China's Loess Plateau were mistaken for being part of the Great Wall. It makes sense since traces of the iconic structure run through the region. But researchers began to rethink this initial assessment when jade fragments and artifacts started turning up. The material wasn't used to build the Great Wall, and its nearest source was over 1,000 miles away, which means that the items had been brought there from somewhere else. Archaeologists excavated the site in recent years and found the ruins of a 4,300-year-old fortress city that thrived around a massive 230-foot-tall step pyramid that spans 59 acres at its base. Over 6 miles of protective walls surrounded the settlement, known as Shima. The pyramid consisted of 11 levels that were each lined with stone. Its top level consisted of palaces where the city's rulers and elites lived. It's also where art and industrial production took place. Some of the most shocking evidence the team found came in the form of 6 pits filled with decapitated skulls, indicating that human sacrifice took place at Shima. Most of the sacrificial victims were young girls who may have been taken prisoner as members of a rival group. The findings represent the first evidence of ritualistic human sacrifice in Chinese history. Shima could perhaps be best described as a cultural enigma unlike any other ancient city ever found in China. As experts learn more about it, the discoveries have the potential to upend their understanding of the region's past. Quinning. During the 1960s, archaeologists discovered the ruins of a village hidden in the thick vegetation at South Africa's Suikersbosrand National Park. It wasn't until 2012 that satellite images revealed that the settlement was much bigger than researchers had ever realized. In 2019, an aerial survey using LiDAR technology showed even more previously unknown structures, putting Quinning's size at 3 times bigger than was originally thought. People began settling at Quinning during the 15th century. It grew from there, and by the time the city reached its peak in 1820, it contained between 800 and 900 walled compounds, with each housing anywhere from a handful of families to many families. At the time, it was home to somewhere from 5,000 to 10,000 people. Researchers dated Quinning based on its architectural style, which resembles structures built by other early civilizations throughout southern Africa during the same period. Its inhabitants were from a group called the Tswana, who still live in the region. Because they have no written language, discoveries like this help to shed light on their history. Speaking with Live Science, archaeologist Karim Sader described Quinning as the largest of the known pre-colonial Tswana capitals. It was ultimately destroyed and abandoned sometime during the 19th century, most likely due to civil warfare. Sahama Lines. The largest archaeological site in the Andes is located in the western Bolivian highlands, where an ancient web-like network of pre-Hispanic linear paths occupy an 8,700 square mile area. They run a combined length of nearly 10,000 miles and take up 3 times as much space as the famed Nazca Lines. Known as the Sahama Lines, the paths may date as far back as 1000 BC and were created over many generations. They were constructed by scraping away the ground's surface rock, soil, and other material to reveal the lighter layers underneath. They traverse through rugged terrain, more or less in straight lines, with the longest lines measuring up to 12.5 miles long. Experts know very little about the Sahama Lines or the people who created them, who may have used them for navigation to sacred sites and villages that were located along the way during pilgrimages. The lines are dotted with the remains of shrines called wakas and burial towers called chulpas. During the early colonial period, the indigenous Aymara people used the Sahama Lines to connect Catholic churches, shrines, and hilltop chapels. They also reused structures and artifacts that were left behind by the previous society. Some researchers even believe that the Sahama Lines are still being used today, but there is no proof to support these claims. Ancient Islamic necropolis in Europe. The Iberian Peninsula served as a frontier between warring Muslims and Christians during a bloody series of religious conflicts that marked the early medieval period, famously known as the Crusades. Muslim rulers conquered the area during the early 8th century, securing their victory by offering generous surrender terms to the population, who by then were fed up with the harsh conditions they endured under previous leadership. The new ruler, Amir Abd al-Rahman, established the Andalusian Umayyad dynasty in 756 AD, delivering a newfound stability to the region that its residents had never experienced. He brought an unprecedented level of power to Muslim rule by unifying the various Islamic groups that had conquered Spain. Over the next several centuries, the area became home to one of the greatest Islamic civilizations of all time. Christians retook the region in 1492 and erased nearly every trace of the cultures they conquered. Archaeological discoveries in recent years have revealed a much larger Muslim presence on the Iberian Peninsula than researchers previously thought. In 2010, a team in the Spanish town of Tauste unearthed over 400 ancient Islamic tombs containing at least 4,500 bodies on an ancient burial ground dating back to the 8th century. The remains show that the bodies buried were associated with Muslim funeral rituals and suggest the town was largely Islamic for centuries, despite there being no mention of this phase in local historic documents. History tends to be written by the victor, and we still have a lot to learn about what really went on in certain places and times. Mardan. Archaeologists were digging among the remains of an ancient settlement in northern Iraq in 2018 when they unearthed a pottery vessel filled with 92 cuneiform tablets. It wasn't until they were deciphered by language expert Bettina Feist that they learned the 4,800-year-old city's name, Mardan. The ruins indicate that the settlement was first established sometime between 2800 BC and 2650 BC, and it peaked between 1900 BC and 1700 BC. Even after its heyday, Mardan continued to thrive until sometime between 911 BC to 612 BC. It was part of several large empires at various points and also functioned as an independent kingdom. The cuneiform tablets date back to around 1250 BC, when a governor named Assur-Nasir ruled the city as part of the Assyrian Empire. They contain details of Assur-Nasir's administrative and commercial affairs with the people of Mardama, according to excavation leader Peter Faltzner. The pottery vessel the tablets were found in was sealed with a thick layer of clay, indicating that residents may have purposely preserved them for posterity, perhaps at a time when Mardan was under attack by another kingdom. Researchers know relatively little about the ancient city's rich history, but have found evidence that it was built and rebuilt numerous times before it was ultimately abandoned for unknown reasons. Thanks for watching! Hope you learned something new today. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon. Bye!